Billionaire CEO breaks down, seeing barefoot poor girl walking on ice, with bloody heels. The traffic light turned red, again. Inside his silver Audi, Caleb exhaled impatiently. The world outside was cold, distant, like his life. And then he saw her. A small barefoot girl crossing Fifth Avenue, her thin dress clinging to her fragile frame. The dog's ribs poked through its skin as it limped beside her. She held the leash with tiny, frozen fingers. Without thinking, Caleb rolled down the window. "Don't your feet hurt?" His voice was steady, but his chest tightened. The girl paused. Her brown eyes, far too old for her face, met his. "They don't hurt anymore," she whispered softly. "They've gotten used to it." And in that moment, the man who owned everything felt something break inside him. For the very first time, barefoot hope. The soft hum of jazz played low in the background as the silver Audi glided through Fifth Avenue. The late autumn sun cast long shadows between the towering buildings, painting streaks of amber and gold across glass facades. Behind the wheel, Caleb Williams adjusted the cuff of his custom-tailored suit and glanced at the clock. 6:37 p.m. Another perfect day in a perfectly controlled life. At 28, Caleb had everything most men could only dream of. Billions in real estate holdings, luxury properties spanning continents, and a cold precision that made investors trust him with fortunes. But beyond the towering boardrooms and glass penthouses, his world was hollow, structured, predictable, lifeless. The light turned red, again. Caleb sighed and tapped his fingers rhythmically against the leather steering wheel. These city lights always seemed to mock him, forcing him into moments of stillness he resented. He turned up the air conditioning, drowning himself in sterile comfort. And then something shifted. Out of the corner of his eye, through the polished glass of his car window, he noticed a flash of movement. Small, fragile, almost surreal. A girl, no older than 10. She was crossing the street, barefoot. Caleb blinked. His grip on the wheel tightened. Her tiny feet, dirty and raw, touched the freezing pavement as if they no longer felt it. The pale skin of her heels was cracked. She clutched the fraying leash of a dog that limped beside her, a skeletal creature whose ribs jutted sharply beneath its matted fur. They looked like they belonged to a different world entirely. Not to this street, not to this city, not to his life. Horns blared behind him as the light switched to green. The cars behind him grew impatient. Caleb pressed the gas almost by instinct, but his gaze stayed fixed on the rear-view mirror, following the fragile silhouette disappearing into the sea of pedestrians. For the first time in years, something tugged at him. Something ancient. Something he thought he'd buried long ago. He made a U-turn at the first intersection, heart racing for reasons he couldn't name. 20 minutes later, Caleb stood on the sidewalk, eyes scanning the busy streets, his breath fogging in the cool air. The city around him buzzed with indifference. People passed him, wrapped in designer coats and fur-lined boots, carrying their lives in shopping bags. But none of them noticed what he was searching for. "Did you see a little girl?" he asked an older woman at a fruit stand, his voice controlled but urgent. "Barefoot with a skinny dog?" The woman squinted at him, sizing him up suspiciously. "Lots of kids pass by here, sir." He moved on. Down one alley, then another. He felt ridiculous in his $3,000 Italian suit, his polished shoes echoing sharply against the damp concrete. People glanced at him warily. Some looked away. Others whispered. The more he searched, the more distant she seemed, as though she might have only been a vision that his tired mind conjured. And just when he was about to give up, he saw her. She was sitting outside the entrance of a closed shop, her back against the cold brick wall, cradling the dog in her lap. The dog's head rested against her thin shoulder, eyes half-lidded but alert. Her hair was tangled, falling in wild waves across her face. The oversized dress she wore hung off her small frame like a drape, thin against the cold. Caleb approached slowly, careful not to frighten her. The dog's head lifted, letting out a low growl, but the girl raised her hand gently and whispered, "It's okay, Max." "I just wanted to see if you're all right," Caleb said softly, keeping his distance. The girl looked up. Her eyes were large, far too large for her tiny face. But they held no fear, only caution, like someone who had learned far too early how dangerous the world could be. "I'm fine," she answered, voice raspy as if she rarely used it. Caleb's gaze dropped instinctively to her feet again. Dirty, cracked, exposed to the elements. "Where are your shoes?" he asked, unable to hide the ache in his voice. The corner of her mouth lifted faintly. Not quite a smile, but something like it. "I don't need them anymore," she said softly. "They don't hurt anymore." Her words struck him like a fist to the chest. He knew pain, the hollow kind that comes from losing parents too soon, from building walls so high that no one could ever reach you again. But he did not know this kind of pain, the kind that rubs your skin raw until even pain gives up and leaves you numb. "I could buy you some shoes," he offered, immediately feeling foolish as the words left his mouth. The girl said nothing. She simply stroked Max's head, her thin fingers disappearing into the dog's matted fur. "What's your name?" he tried again. The girl hesitated, measuring him. "Ellie," she whispered, "and he's Max." "Do you have somewhere to stay, Ellie?" Her silence was long. The distant noise of the city swallowed the moment whole. "We always have somewhere," she finally said. She stood slowly, Max rising to follow her with a quiet whimper. "Come on, Max." Before Caleb could say another word, she was already walking away, the girl and her dog vanishing into the crowd as easily as smoke. That night, as Caleb sat alone in his penthouse, the whiskey untouched on his desk, his world felt smaller than ever before. The city lights twinkled far below, but for once, they offered no comfort. "My feet don't hurt anymore." Her voice haunted him. It was not pity he felt. It was something deeper, a strange hunger he hadn't felt in years, for meaning, for connection, for redemption. And he knew, with unexplainable certainty, this wasn't the end. He would find her again. Chapter 1. The First Encounter. The morning after felt different. Caleb sat at his glass dining table, untouched coffee cooling in his cup as the pale Manhattan sun fought its way through the towering skyline. The penthouse around him gleamed, every surface polished, every corner staged, yet none of it felt real. Not after last night. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Her feet, thin dress, those wide brown eyes that held far too much for someone so young. "Ellie," he whispered her name under his breath, as if afraid speaking it aloud would make the memory fade. But it didn't. If anything, it etched deeper. Caleb stood suddenly, abandoning his coffee, his breakfast, his schedule. His life had always been ruled by structure, every hour accounted for, every meeting perfectly aligned. But now? Now, the order of things no longer mattered. He had to find her. By 4 p.m., he was back on Fifth Avenue. Same street, same spot. But the crowd had swallowed her whole. Caleb parked the Audi nearby, slipped out of his tailored jacket and began to walk, aimless at first, scanning every face. He approached a hot dog vendor. "Have you seen a little girl? About 10, thin, no shoes. She has a dog." The vendor looked up from his grill, eyes narrowing. "No shoes?" He shrugged. "Lots of homeless kids pass through here. Don't pay 'em much mind." Caleb tried again at a newspaper stand, then a dry cleaner, then a woman sweeping the front of a flower shop. Always the same dismissive glance, the same casual disinterest. It was like trying to find smoke. Hours passed. The sky darkened, street lights buzzed awake. Still nothing. At a small fruit stand, under a flickering neon sign, an older woman with gray-streaked hair rearranged bruised apples. Caleb hesitated before approaching. "Excuse me," he said, trying to soften the sharp edge of his voice. "I asked around here yesterday about the little girl." "Barefoot, with the dog?" the woman interrupted, her voice cautious. Hope flared in his chest. "Yes. You've seen her?" The woman eyed him carefully, distrustfully. "Why are you looking for her?" Caleb paused. The truth sounded absurd even to himself. "Because she cracked something inside me that I didn't know was broken. I just want to help." The woman didn't answer immediately. She rubbed her fingers over the fabric of her apron, gaze darting past him toward the busy street. You people don't usually notice kids like that. I know. She comes by sometimes, picks up scraps when I throw out fruit at closing. Her voice lowered. But she's careful, skittish. If you're looking for her to cause trouble, I'm not. The woman studied him for another long moment, then nodded toward a corner 3 blocks down. Try the alley behind Samir's store. Sometimes the kids gather there late. Caleb nodded his thanks and moved quickly, pulse racing. The alley was narrow, wedged between 2 weathered buildings. Trash bins lined one side. The other was nothing but brick and graffiti. Far down near the back, a dim light flickered above a metal doorway. And there she was. Ellie sat cross-legged on a flattened piece of cardboard, Max curled tightly against her side. She was feeding him scraps from what looked like an old sandwich, carefully rationing each bite between herself and the dog. Caleb froze for a moment, watching. He took in every detail. Her knobby knees, the dirt streaked along her arms, the small plastic hair clip barely holding her tangled hair back. She looked up then, sensing him. Max lifted his head and let out a low growl. "It's all right," Caleb said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I'm not here to hurt you." Ellie narrowed her eyes, her small frame tense but unmoving. "You're the car man." He allowed a small smile. "I suppose I am." "Why are you here?" Her voice was quiet but steady. "I've been looking for you." Ellie's expression didn't change. "Most people don't." "I couldn't forget you," Caleb admitted softly. I want to help." She shook her head slowly. "People always want something. Not me." A bitter little smile tugged at the corner of her lips, one that didn't match her age. "They say that at first." Max relaxed slightly, sensing the lack of threat, but Ellie's guarded eyes stayed locked on him. "May I sit?" Caleb asked. She hesitated before nodding once. Carefully, Caleb lowered himself onto the opposite side of the alley, leaving enough space between them so she wouldn't feel trapped. They sat in silence for a while. The noise of the city faded into the distance, replaced by the soft sounds of Max's breathing and the faint buzzing of the faulty light above them. "Do you live here?" Caleb asked gently. Ellie shrugged. "Sometimes, depends." "On what?" "On who's around, where it's safest." Caleb swallowed, his throat tightening. "Do you have anyone? Family?" Her face shifted then, a flicker of sadness, too quick for most to catch, but Caleb saw it. "My mom, she's gone." There was a finality to it, but also an emptiness. He didn't press further. "And Max?" She smiled, genuinely this time, reaching to pet the dog's thin coat. "I found him, in a dumpster behind a restaurant. Somebody threw him away." Caleb's chest ached. "Saved me too," Ellie added softly. "We take care of each other." The air grew colder as the wind whistled through the alley. "You're freezing," Caleb observed. "You shouldn't be out here like this." "I've been out here lots of nights." "That doesn't mean you have to be." Her gaze hardened. "You can't fix it." "I don't want to fix you, Ellie." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I just want to keep you safe." Max shifted, laying his head in Ellie's lap. "Why?" she asked quietly. "You don't even know me." Caleb took a slow breath. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to lose people. And I know what it feels like to pretend you're fine when you're not." Ellie looked at him for a long time, studying him carefully. "You're not like the others." He smiled faintly. "I hope not." Another long pause. Then, as if making a decision, Ellie finally said, "You can come back tomorrow if you want." As Caleb stood to leave, he felt something in his chest he hadn't felt in years. But both, not for himself. Chapter 2. The Relentless Search. The next morning came earlier than Caleb expected. Not because his alarm rang any sooner, but because sleep had barely touched him. Every time he drifted off, her face returned, pale, thin, too small for the weight she carried. "Ellie." As the city stretched awake, Caleb was already dressed. He skipped his usual breakfast, left his untouched espresso cooling on the marble countertop, and stepped into the elevator with a singular purpose. For the first time in years, business could wait. By late afternoon, he found himself back near the same alley behind Samir's store, The same cardboard box where Ellie had sat the night before was there, but now only dampened pieces of it remained. The spot was empty. Caleb scanned the streets. She had told him he could come back, and he had, but she was gone. He tried asking again. The same fruit vendor, the same shopkeepers. Most shrugged, some didn't even answer. By early evening, Caleb was walking the streets aimlessly, searching doorways and park benches. His perfectly polished shoes grew dull from grime and slush. His tailored coat offered no shield from the raw winter wind biting through the city. At one corner, a man in a heavy coat, a parking lot attendant, watched him with narrowed eyes. "You lost something, mister." Caleb hesitated. "I'm looking for a girl, 10 years old. She has a skinny dog." She said her name was Ellie. The man exhaled, warm breath billowing into the cold. "Lot of kids out here, but yeah, I've seen her." Caleb's pulse quickened. "Where?" The attendant gestured behind him. "Sometimes she sleeps under that old awning near the abandoned commercial lot, but she doesn't stay too long. Moves around." Caleb followed the direction instantly. The lot was deserted, empty windows boarded up, graffiti tagging the walls like a forgotten message to no one. He found remnants of someone who had once camped there. A flattened blanket, a torn piece of newspaper, an old soup can. But no Ellie, no Max. The days passed. Each day, Caleb repeated the same pattern. Office in the morning, quick calls, rushed through meetings with distant eyes, and by late afternoon he returned to those streets, searching. He met the night guards at nearby stores, the waiters at late-night diners, delivery boys who zipped through alleyways. Piece by piece, a fragile map of Ellie's existence emerged. A diner owner mentioned she sometimes showed up near closing, picking up leftover sandwiches, always feeding Max first. A man selling used books told Caleb she liked to stop by, flipping through picture books without ever daring to ask for one. A night guard at a laundromat had seen her curl up under the shelter of an old stairwell during heavy rain. Caleb collected every fragment like precious evidence, building a picture of her invisible life. This city, his city, had always looked so different from his penthouse window. One bitterly cold evening, as flurries of snow began to fall, Caleb found a small group of kids gathered around a burning barrel in a public park. Their clothes were thin, their faces sunken with hunger, but their eyes were sharp, always watching, always calculating. Caleb approached carefully, hands visible. "Hi," he started. "I'm looking for someone." They stared back, silent. "A girl, Ellie. She has a dog named Max." The oldest of the group, maybe 13, stepped forward. His posture was defensive, chin raised. "Why? I just want to help." "Help?" The boy spat the word like it was poisonous. "Like social workers? Or the cops? Or those people that separate kids from their dogs? That kind of help?" Caleb paused. "No, I promise. I only want to make sure she's safe." The boy's jaw tightened. For a moment, Caleb thought he would turn away. But then, unexpectedly, a younger girl spoke up, her voice soft, almost guilty. "She's sick. Been coughing a lot." Caleb's heart dropped. "Where is she now?" The older boy stepped in again, shaking his head. "We don't rat on our own, mister. You might mean well now, but you people always change your mind later." Caleb reached into his pocket, pulled out a few $20 bills, and gently laid them on the cold bench. "For food. For whoever needs it." He backed away slowly, not expecting gratitude. The kids didn't touch the money until he disappeared around the corner. That night, Caleb returned to his penthouse exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The place felt even larger now, too big, too quiet. His reflection stared back at him from the floor-to-ceiling windows. A man who once had full control of his world, now completely unmoored. A week passed, then two. Still no sign of Ellie. The people at work started noticing. His business partners whispered behind closed doors. Shareholders wondered why meetings were shorter, why Caleb Williams seemed distracted. But none dared question him directly. Caleb had built his empire on being cold, efficient, unapproachable. They didn't realize that somewhere on the streets of their city was a barefoot girl who had undone every wall he'd spent his life building. One night, as snow whipped against his windshield, Caleb parked beneath an overpass he hadn't checked before. The storm had grown vicious. The wind howled through the concrete pillars. Shadows danced beneath the dim lights. His headlights caught glimpses of makeshift shelters, tarps, old blankets, discarded boxes. And then, he saw her. Ellie sat under one of the pillars, knees drawn to her chest, holding Max tightly against her side. The dog's fur was soaked, his ribs even more pronounced now. Ellie's dress clung to her thin frame, wet and heavy. She was shivering, but she still held a piece of stale bread in her hands, splitting it evenly, half for Max, half for herself. Caleb stepped out of the car, umbrella useless against the sideways rain. His shoes sank into puddles of icy water as he approached. Max lifted his head first, his ears flattening in warning, but this time he didn't growl. Ellie looked up next. Her face was pale. She recognized him immediately. "You came back," she whispered. Caleb exhaled shakily, fighting the lump rising in his throat. "Of course I did." Ellie looked down at Max again, pulling him closer. "We're fine." But her voice cracked under the lie. Caleb knelt a few feet away, rain soaking his expensive coat. "You're sick, Ellie." "I'll be fine. I've been worse." His chest tightened. "You don't have to live like this." The rain beat against the concrete around them, a harsh percussion underscoring the desperation in the air. Ellie's defenses faltered. Her lip trembled as she spoke softly. "I can't leave Max." "You won't have to." Caleb's voice was firm, steady. "I can take both of you, somewhere warm, safe." She hesitated. For the first time, real uncertainty crossed her face. Her world had never offered her anything without a price. "I won't take anything from you that I don't freely give," Caleb said. "No deals, no tricks, just safety for both of you." For a long time, Ellie said nothing. Then finally, she nodded once. "Okay," she whispered, "but Max comes first." "Always," Caleb promised. As he gently led them toward the car, his umbrella shielding both of them now, Caleb felt it again. That unfamiliar sensation he couldn't quite name. Purpose. For the first time in years, his life was no longer empty. It had begun again. With her, Chapter 3, Shelter from the Storm. The taxi driver glanced nervously in the rearview mirror. Caleb noticed the man's eyes darting between Ellie, Max, and the wet bundle of blankets now soaking the leather seats. But he said nothing. The silence inside the car was tense, heavy. The only sound was the soft breathing of Max, curled up tightly at Ellie's side, shivering but safe for now. Ellie clutched the edge of Caleb's coat, still wrapped around her small frame. She hadn't spoken much since agreeing to leave with him. Her eyes darted between the glowing city lights streaking past the window, as if memorizing them, just in case she needed to run again. She was used to running. "You live here?" she finally asked in a small voice, breaking the silence as they neared Caleb's building. "Yes. The top floor." It's..." Caleb smiled softly. "It is." When the taxi pulled up to the luxury high-rise, the doorman rushed out, holding an umbrella, his polished uniform immaculate despite the storm still raging outside. His brows twitched ever so slightly as he took in the scene. His employer, returning with a barefoot girl, drenched, and a mangy dog in tow. But like any professional trained in discretion, he said nothing. "Good evening, Mr. Williams." "Evening, David. We'll need some towels upstairs, please." "Right away, sir." As the elevator doors slid closed behind them, Ellie's wide eyes took in the mirrored walls, the golden buttons, and the faint classical music humming from hidden speakers. Max whimpered softly, pressing closer to her. "You're not in trouble," Caleb reassured her quietly. "I promise." Ellie nodded, but her hands clutched the soaked blanket tighter. When the elevator opened directly into Caleb's penthouse, Ellie froze at the threshold. Her dirty, bare feet hovered above pristine marble floors. The enormous windows revealed a panorama of Manhattan's glittering skyline, now softened by the fog of the storm. The polished surfaces, soft recessed lighting, and cold symmetry of the modern furniture all felt sterile, almost clinical. Ellie stood there, shrinking into herself. She looked like she didn't belong. And for a moment, Caleb hated how sterile his world was. "You can come in," he said gently. "This is your home tonight." Still hesitant, Ellie stepped forward, her footsteps soundless. Max padded behind her, ears low. Caleb moved quickly to grab towels, returning with a stack of them in a thick blanket. "Here," he said, kneeling beside Max first. "Let's get him dry." Surprisingly, Max let Caleb approach, perhaps sensing the man's sincerity. As he carefully rubbed the soaked fur, Ellie sat nearby, drying her hair with small, cautious movements. "You're not mad?" she asked quietly after a long pause. "Mad? No, why would I be? Most people get mad when you make messes in their nice places." Caleb's chest tightened. What had this child endured to make her believe kindness was always conditional? "This is just a floor," he said softly. "You and Max are what matter." Ellie gave him a long, unreadable look, as though trying to decide if he was telling the truth. After they were both dried off and Max wrapped tightly in the blanket, Caleb showed Ellie to the guest room. The space was minimalist, like the rest of the penthouse. Soft gray bedding, a queen-size bed, large windows overlooking the city, and a walk-in closet that had never seen a single item hung inside. "This will be yours for as long as you want it." Ellie stood at the edge of the bed, staring at it like it was some foreign object. She ran her fingers along the soft comforter. "Can Max sleep on it?" "Of course," Caleb said instantly. "This is your space." Ellie nodded, still cautious. "He doesn't like being far away." "Then he'll stay with you." Caleb paused. "I have some clothes you can change into. They'll be big on you, but they're warm." He placed a folded t-shirt and sweatpants on the edge of the bed, careful not to move too close. "If you need anything, I'll be right outside." In the kitchen, Caleb prepared something simple: scrambled eggs, toast, and fruit. It was late, but something warm would help. As he worked, he listened for any sound from the guest room. After a while, Ellie appeared, wearing the oversized shirt like a dress, her damp hair curled around her face, freshly washed and far cleaner than when he first saw her. Max followed, tail slightly wagging but still cautious. Caleb smiled gently. "Come sit." Ellie slid onto one of the tall kitchen stools, her feet dangling far above the ground. Her eyes widened slightly at the food laid out before her. "You hungry?" She nodded once. Caleb watched as she ate, careful, controlled bites, as though rationing each mouthful. She always offered the first piece of toast to Max, who licked it gratefully. "You don't have to save it," Caleb said softly. "There's plenty." She paused mid-bite, lowering her gaze. "We don't waste, not ever." Caleb's throat tightened. "That's a good rule." As they ate, the rain continued to drum against the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside a soft warmth began to settle. "Where were you before?" Caleb asked gently, testing the waters. Ellie shrugged. "Different places. We move around a lot." "You don't have any family?" The shadow crossed her face. "No." "What about before the streets?" She grew very quiet, staring down at Max's ears as she stroked them rhythmically. "My mom, for a while. She tried. Then one day, she didn't come back." Her voice broke slightly. Caleb resisted the urge to reach across the table. The trust was too fragile. He wouldn't rush it. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Ellie offered a tiny, almost invisible nod. "We had a little apartment once. She said it wasn't much, but it was ours. She always made tea at night." Her eyes grew distant, lost in memory. They sat like that for a long time, Caleb listening, Ellie offering fragments. Eventually, Max belly full, the dog curled into a tight ball at her feet and dozed off. Ellie's eyelids began to droop as well. "You can sleep now," Caleb whispered, standing. "You're safe here." She didn't argue, just slid down from the stool and padded softly toward the guest room. Before disappearing inside, she paused. "You're not like the others." Caleb felt something sharp twist inside him. "I hope not." With that, she closed the door gently behind her. That night, Caleb stood in his living room, staring at the city lights. His usual glass of whiskey sat untouched. The wind howled against the windows, but for once, he didn't feel alone. In the guest room, a fragile child and her dog slept peacefully. The first safe night they'd had in who knew how long. For years, Caleb had built towers that touched the clouds, signed deals that moved millions, controlled boardrooms with a single glance. And yet tonight, For the first time, he had done something that felt real. He whispered softly into the quiet. "I'll protect you, both of you." Chapter 4. The Penthouse Stranger. The first light of morning bled softly through the towering windows of Caleb's penthouse. Golden ribbons stretched across the marble floors as the city below stirred awake. But this morning, Caleb was already sitting in the living room when the sun arrived. His coffee sat untouched. He kept glancing down the hallway toward the guest room door. Would she still be there? Would she panic and run in the night? Would she trust him enough to stay? But then, faintly, he heard the gentle shuffle of feet against the polished floor. Max was first to emerge, sniffing cautiously around the unfamiliar hallway before padding into the living room, tail swishing softly. And behind him came Ellie. Still barefoot, still guarded. Her small hands clutched the oversized t-shirt like armor. "Good morning," Caleb greeted softly, careful not to make his voice too bright or intrusive. Ellie offered a slight nod. "Morning. You slept well?" A small pause. Then, "Yeah, the bed's soft." Caleb smiled, relieved. She stepped further into the living room, eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. Every polished surface, every expensive detail seemed foreign to her, as though she had landed inside a place she wasn't meant to touch. "Are you hungry?" Caleb asked gently. "I can make pancakes." Ellie hesitated. Max gave a small huff beside her, sensing the word pancakes was promising. Caleb chuckled softly. "I think Max votes yes." At last, Ellie whispered, "Okay." The kitchen smelled warm with butter and syrup as Caleb carefully flipped another pancake onto her plate. Ellie sat at the high counter, feet swinging just above the floor, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the marble counter. "I haven't had pancakes in a long time," she murmured. "Well," Caleb said, pouring syrup onto his own plate, "we'll have to fix that." She watched him quietly for a moment, as though trying to solve a puzzle. "You're not like most rich people." The comment startled him slightly. "Oh, and how are most rich people?" "They don't see people like me." Her voice wasn't bitter. It was matter-of-fact, as though reciting a universal truth. "Maybe walk by, look down, pretend we're not there." Caleb swallowed, realizing how often that had been true of him. "I guess I've been like that too, until now." Ellie studied him for a beat longer, but said nothing, her small hands wrapping around the warm mug of cocoa he had made for her. Later that morning, Caleb stood at his desk in the study while Mrs. Martinez arrived, the housekeeper who'd worked for him for years. A kindly Puerto Rican woman in her 60s, she was fiercely loyal but never nosy. Today, though, her surprise was visible when she saw the child curled up with a dog on the living room couch. "Mr. Williams?" she whispered as she followed him into the office. Caleb kept his voice low. "She's a guest. Her name is Ellie, and the dog is Max." Mrs. Martinez blinked, but said nothing judgmental. Only curiosity flickered in her kind eyes. She lowered her voice even more. "Family?" "Not exactly," Caleb said softly, "but important." She glanced back toward Ellie once more, watching the way the little girl clutched Max like an anchor. "Understood." Caleb exhaled, grateful for her discretion. As the days passed, a new rhythm emerged. In the mornings, Caleb would attend to his work calls and emails in his office, but every hour or so he'd step out to check on Ellie, always finding her in different, quiet corners of the penthouse. One day, she was sitting near the balcony window, watching the taxis crawl through the streets below. Another day, she lay on the living room rug, reading a picture book he'd left for her. Always with Max at her side, always staying near the edges of the room, as though still unsure she truly belonged. Caleb never forced her closer. He let her have space. One evening, as snow flurried lightly beyond the windows, Caleb came home early. Ellie was curled up on the couch, flipping through a book about animals. Max lay beside her, his belly finally fuller, his fur finally regaining a soft sheen. Caleb sat on the opposite end of the couch, keeping a safe distance. "Did you like the book?" She nodded without looking up. "There's a part about whales." "Whales?" Caleb smiled. "I didn't know you liked the ocean." "I don't know if I like it yet," she said softly. "I've never seen it." Caleb paused, swallowing. "Maybe one day we'll go." Ellie glanced up at him then, searching his face, trying to decide if she dared believe him. "Maybe," she whispered, as if afraid to hope. That night, something shifted. After dinner, as Caleb worked at his desk, Ellie quietly padded into his office. She hesitated near the doorway. Caleb looked up and smiled. "Come in." She approached, eyes scanning the room. "What are you doing?" "Some very boring work." He closed the file in front of him. "I could use a break." Ellie smiled faintly. "Do you want to draw something? I have paper." Her eyes lit up for the first time since she'd arrived. "Okay." Caleb handed her a notepad and colored pencils. She settled into the armchair across from him, Max curling at her feet. For the next hour they sat in quiet companionship, Caleb working, Ellie drawing. When she finally held up the picture, Caleb's breath caught. It was simple, childish but full of heart, 3 stick figures beneath a large moon. One was tall, one small, and beside them a small round shape with floppy ears. "That's us," she whispered, almost shyly. "You, me, and Max." Caleb's chest tightened as his eyes stung. He couldn't speak for a moment, afraid his voice would betray him. "It's perfect," he finally managed. Ellie smiled, a real, full smile. The first one. That night, as Caleb stood once again by the window, watching the city lights flicker far below, he felt something new stirring in his chest. This apartment, once cold and empty, now breathed. Her laughter still echoed faintly from the hallway. The tiny drawing sat propped up on his desk. And for the first time in years, Caleb didn't feel like a man simply floating through life. He was tethered to something real, to someone who, against all odds, had found her way into his world. And he wasn't going to let her slip away. Chapter 5: Tiny Seeds of Trust. It started with the plants. Caleb hadn't noticed before how sterile his home really was. The towering glass windows, the pristine marble, the designer furniture, all perfectly curated, but utterly lifeless. Now, as Ellie wandered quietly through the penthouse day by day, she brought little requests that slowly transformed the space. "Can we get something green?" she asked one morning, her voice tentative, almost unsure if she was allowed. "Green. Plants, flowers maybe. My mom used to like them." Caleb smiled gently. "Of course." The following afternoon they visited a nursery on the Upper East Side. It was a far cry from the cold streets where Caleb had first found her. The air smelled of earth and moisture. Rows of vibrant flowers stretched under soft sunlight filtering through glass ceilings. Ellie's eyes widened, her small hand instinctively reaching out to touch the velvety petals of a violet. "She always called them brave," Ellie whispered. "Violets. Because they bloom even when it's cold." Caleb knelt beside her. "Then let's get some violets." "And maybe a fern," she added softly. "Max won't eat it." Caleb chuckled. "A fern it is." They left with a collection of plants. Violets, a fern, and a small potted jasmine. When they returned home, Ellie carefully arranged them near the windows, her face calm, focused, as though restoring something sacred. The apartment breathed with new life. Days turned into weeks. Caleb settled into a routine he never could have imagined months ago. He found himself adjusting board meetings to end earlier, turning down dinner invitations, and stepping away from negotiations that once consumed his every hour. Because at home, someone waited. Each afternoon, Ellie greeted him at the door with Max faithfully by her side. She no longer flinched when he entered, no longer glanced around as if preparing for something bad to happen. Little by little, her posture softened. Caleb never forced conversation, but Ellie slowly started offering pieces of herself in small, delicate fragments. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sun disappear into the Manhattan skyline, Ellie spoke without being prompted. "My mom used to say the city looked like stars trapped inside glass." Caleb smiled, turning toward her. "That's beautiful." She always wanted to leave the city, though, somewhere with trees. She said it was too loud here. He nodded. "Do you want to leave one day too?" Ellie shrugged. "Maybe, but not yet." Her eyes flicked upward toward the purple sky. "It's nice here now." Her voice carried a quiet weight, not gratitude, but something deeper. Safety. Another morning, over breakfast, Ellie asked cautiously, Do you work all the time? Caleb sipped his coffee. Not as much as I used to. Because of me? Because of you and Max, and because work isn't everything. Ellie played with the edge of her pancake, considering that. My mom worked a lot, she whispered. She had to. But sometimes, I think she worked so much that she forgot how to smile. Her voice trembled slightly at the end. Caleb's heart clenched. He reached across the table and laid his hand flat, palm open. Not reaching for her, just offering. After a moment's hesitation, Ellie placed her small hand in his. Her fingers were warm, delicate, and slightly rough, hardened by far too much survival for a girl her age. They sat like that, silent but connected. Father's hand, a daughter's hand, even if neither had said the words aloud yet. One afternoon, Mrs. Martinez approached Caleb while Ellie was reading on the couch. She's changing, the housekeeper whispered quietly in the hallway. You see it, right? Caleb nodded, his throat tightening. I see it. He's starting to believe this is real. Caleb's voice dropped. And I won't let her lose that. Mrs. Martinez smiled softly. Then you're already doing better than most. Later that week, something unexpected happened. Ellie approached Caleb's office holding a thin book. Can you show me how stocks work? He looked up from his laptop, surprised. Stocks? You said you work with numbers and companies. I want to learn. Her eyes were bright, curious, hungry for knowledge. Caleb motioned for her to sit beside him. For the next hour, he simplified the complex world of business into drawings and diagrams. Instead of spreadsheets and percentages, he spoke of simple exchanges, ownership, building something over time. Ellie listened intently, her brows furrowed, occasionally asking sharp, intelligent questions that surprised even him. You're very smart, he said sincerely. My mom always said I was good at figuring things out. Caleb smiled. She was right. Ellie bit her lip, glancing down at the paper between them. Maybe, one day, I could work with you? Caleb's chest tightened at the innocence of the question. She wasn't asking for money or guarantees, she was asking for hope. For as long as you want, he said softly, we'll build something together. Her smile was small, but radiant. The following weekend, Caleb surprised her with something simple, but meaningful. They visited a small bookstore. Pick anything you want, he offered. Ellie's eyes widened. She moved slowly, as though afraid the invitation might be revoked. Her fingers trailed along the shelves of children's novels, nature books, science guides. She carefully chose 3. One about whales, one about gardening, and one about constellations. Why these? Caleb asked gently as they checked out. Because they're things I've never seen yet. That night, Caleb placed a small telescope by her bedroom window. Ellie gasped when she saw it. For the constellations, Caleb said simply. She stared at it in wonder, then whispered, Thank you. For the first time, she stepped closer and, without hesitation, hugged him. A quick, tight squeeze before stepping back. His brief, but it was everything. As the city glowed beneath them, Caleb realized something undeniable. He wasn't rescuing her. She was rescuing him. Every moment, every smile, every cautious step forward was breaking open places inside him that had long been frozen. He thought about his parents, the emptiness that their loss had carved inside him years ago. And now, without planning, without expecting, this small girl with a quiet bravery was filling that space. A second chance. And Caleb swore silently to himself. I will not fail her. Chapter 6. The Mother's Name. The apartment felt warmer now, not because of the heating system or the thick rugs beneath their feet, but because life had finally seeped into the cold, empty walls. Drawings hung on the refrigerator door, simple sketches Ellie had done, whales, stars, Max, and even one of Caleb with his phone in one hand and coffee in the other. She titled it, Busy. There were plants thriving in every corner now, violets, the fern, and even a stubborn little cactus Ellie had insisted on rescuing from a flower shop clearance bin. Caleb had grown used to hearing her light footsteps in the morning, Max's soft barks chasing after her, and the gentle hum of her voice humming small tunes as she watered her plants or read by the window. The house no longer echoed. It breathed. One quiet evening, after their usual dinner of pasta and garlic bread, Max licking the last crumbs of parmesan off the floor, Ellie wandered into the living room carrying one of her books. "Can we watch something before bed?" "Of course," Caleb said, setting his tablet aside. "You pick." She scrolled through the streaming options with the concentration of a scholar, finally settling on a nature documentary about whales. "They sing to each other," she said, her voice light with fascination as the massive creatures glided across the screen. "Even when they're far away." Caleb smiled, watching her more than the whales. "They're trying to find each other." Ellie nodded, "like they're calling someone they miss." Her words landed with a quiet weight, settling heavily between them. For a long while, neither spoke. The room was filled only with the haunting melody of whale songs and the rhythmic breathing of Max, curled on the floor at Ellie's feet. And then, softly, Ellie broke the silence. "My mom used to sing to me sometimes." Caleb's heart clenched. He kept his voice steady. "She did?" Ellie nodded, eyes still on the screen. "Only at night, so the neighbors wouldn't hear and get mad." "What did she sing?" "I don't know the name. Something about birds, I think." She paused, almost smiling at the memory. "She called me her little bird." Caleb froze. The room seemed to tilt slightly under his feet. "Little bird." That was what he used to call her, Victoria, when they were young, when life still felt full of impossible plans. His little bird. Because she had always dreamed of flying free from her broken world. Caleb swallowed, suddenly unable to breathe. "What was your mom's name?" he asked gently, trying to sound casual. Ellie barely glanced his way. "Victoria." His chest tightened. "Victoria what?" "Mendez," she shrugged. "Victoria Mendez." The name struck him like a blow. The air around him seemed to thin, his vision blurred for a second. Victoria Mendez. The girl from so many years ago. His first love. The one who vanished from his life the summer after graduation. The one he never stopped thinking about but eventually convinced himself he had to forget. Now her daughter, their daughter, was sitting just feet away, staring at the glowing screen, utterly unaware of the earthquake she'd just set off inside him. Caleb's hands trembled, but he forced himself to keep his expression steady. Did she ever talk about where she came from? School? Friends? Ellie shook her head. Not really. She said she wanted to be a doctor once, but she had to work. He closed his eyes briefly, fighting the rising tide of emotions. That was Victoria. Scholarship student. Top of their class. Brilliant. And now, gone. For the rest of the documentary, Caleb could barely hear the narrator's voice. His mind spun with fragments of old memories. The secret study sessions. Their stolen walks through the park. The whispered promises. The summer she disappeared without warning. The letter she left behind. "I need to find my own path. Don't look for me." And now, all these years later, here was Ellie. The girl who had walked barefoot across Fifth Avenue, carrying only a starving dog, and possibly his own blood running through her veins. When the documentary ended, Ellie yawned and rubbed her eyes. "I'm tired. I'll tuck you in," Caleb said softly. Max rose and followed them down the hallway, tail swishing rhythmically. Inside the bedroom, Ellie climbed into bed, pulling the comforter up to her chin. Max settled at her side instantly, his head resting protectively on her stomach. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Ellie." He reached to turn off the lamp, but then her small voice stopped him. "Thank you. For everything." His chest ached. "You're very welcome," he whispered. Later that night, Caleb sat alone in his office, the soft glow of the city outside blurring through the window as his thoughts spiraled. Could it be true? Could Ellie really be his? The timeline made sense. Clarity disappeared about 15 years ago. Around the same time Ellie would have been conceived. And those eyes, those same brown eyes Victoria had once looked at him with. The dimples when she smiled. The quiet way she thought before speaking. Even the way she wrapped Max's blanket, like a protective cocoon, mirrored how Victoria used to curl into his arms on cold nights. Caleb's hands shook as he opened his laptop. He needed answers. The search began clumsy at first. Victoria Mendez, missing, New York. Old records. Some dead ends, a few scattered mentions. Then he dug deeper, into public databases, old-school enrollment lists, missing person reports. Hours passed as midnight bled into morning. Finally, he hit on something. Victoria Mendez, scholarship student, graduated top of her class, disappeared the summer after high school. Last known address, Brooklyn. No further public record. Caleb's heart pounded. No marriage license, no work history, no death certificate. Just vanished. He sat back in his chair, breathing hard, his mind racing. He would need more than online searches. This would require professionals, private investigators, lawyers, people who could quietly search places his name couldn't reach. But beneath all the spinning thoughts was something steady, undeniable. He already knew, even without proof, even before DNA tests or legal documents. Ellie was his. In the quiet darkness of his apartment, he whispered into the silence as though Victoria might somehow hear him from wherever she was. I found her. I found our daughter. Chapter 7. The Quiet Investigation. The next morning, Caleb stood by the kitchen island, stirring Ellie's hot chocolate while his mind churned beneath the surface. Ellie sat at the counter, her damp hair curling over her shoulders as she fed Max small pieces of apple, giggling softly as the dog licked her fingers. The simple scene was so warm, so ordinary, yet under it all, Caleb's pulse quickened. Victoria. He couldn't stop hearing the name every time he looked at Ellie now. Your pancakes are ready, he said gently, sliding her plate in front of her. Thanks. Ellie beamed, as if unaware that her very existence had cracked open an entire past Caleb thought he'd buried. He watched her as she ate, the small, careful bites, the way she saved the last piece of pancake for Max, the way she always looked around the room first, as though making sure she still belonged there. She did. More than she knew. Later that afternoon, Caleb made a call. A private call. One that would set everything in motion. Richard Dawson had been Caleb's personal attorney for over a decade. Discreet, thorough, trustworthy. By 4 p.m., they sat together in Richard's office, a room wrapped in dark wood lined with law books exuding the weight of power and secrets. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, folding his hands over a slim folder on the desk. You sounded urgent. Caleb exhaled slowly. I need you to find someone. Quietly. Who? Victoria Mendez. Richard's brows lifted slightly. Victoria Mendez. He repeated the name slowly. Old girlfriend? Old love. Caleb's voice was quieter now. She disappeared over a decade ago, no trace, but I believe she had a child. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. This child? Ellie? Caleb nodded. Does she know you suspect you're her father? No, not yet. I want to be sure before I say anything. Richard was silent for a moment, then tapped a pen lightly against his desk. Do you have anything? Any leads? Where to start? Caleb handed him a small packet of information. Victoria's last known address, their old high school records, a few names of people who might have known her back then. Richard flipped through the pages. I'll assign my best investigator. We'll keep it off the record. Thank you, Caleb said softly, his voice tight with emotion. And Richard, if she's gone, I still need to know. Richard nodded slowly. We'll find her, Caleb, one way or another. Days passed, and with each passing day, the weight inside Caleb's chest grew heavier. He continued his routine with Ellie, breakfast together, short walks with Max in the park, helping her with her studies. But beneath the surface, the storm was building. Every time Ellie laughed, he saw Victoria's smile. Every time she furrowed her brow in concentration, he saw Victoria's determination. It was like seeing pieces of the woman he'd once loved return to him in fragments. One night, after Ellie had gone to bed, Caleb stood by her doorway, quietly watching her sleep. Max was curled at her feet, breathing softly. Her face, even in sleep, held a kind of peace that made Caleb ache. If only Victoria could see her. The call came exactly 12 days later. Richard's voice was solemn on the other end of the line. Come to the office, we found her. The tension in Richard's office was palpable when Caleb arrived. The folder was already sitting on the desk, thicker now, full of reports, records, photos, and court documents. Richard didn't speak right away. He simply opened the folder and turned it toward Caleb. The first image hit him like a punch to the gut. It was a poor-quality black and white photograph from a police report. Even grainy and faded, the face was unmistakable. Victoria, older, thinner. Her face worn by years of struggle. The vibrant spark he remembered replaced with exhaustion. Caleb's breath caught. Richard's voice was calm but gentle. We confirmed it through fingerprints. She died 5 years ago. Caleb's throat closed. Hit by a bus while crossing a street. No ID on her at the time. Listed as a Jane Doe for almost a year. Eventually buried in the municipal cemetery. Section 14. Caleb closed his eyes. Why didn't anyone find her? She lived off the grid, Caleb. No work records, no government benefits. It's likely she avoided authorities to keep Ellie from being taken into the system. Caleb swallowed hard, fighting the lump in his throat. She was trying to protect her. Yes. A heavy silence filled the office. What about Ellie? Any records connecting them? Richard shook his head. Nothing official. After Victoria's death, Ellie disappeared. She likely went straight into street life. No foster records, no school enrollments, no medical history. Caleb's hand ran down his face, trembling. All those years. All the nights Ellie must have slept in alleys and under bridges, carrying her mother's absence like a silent weight. And Caleb, living comfortably in his penthouse, unaware that his child was fighting to survive just miles away. The guilt sliced through him. Caleb, Richard said gently, we can request a court-ordered paternity test, but I don't need it. Caleb's voice was hoarse. She's mine. Richard nodded. Then we'll begin the adoption process immediately. Caleb exhaled, his breath shuddering. Thank you, Richard. This won't take long. Given your resources and her current situation, the courts will fast-track it. That night, Caleb returned home heavy but determined. Ellie was sitting on the couch when he arrived, Max's head resting in her lap. She was drawing again, her soft humming filling the room with a fragile comfort. Caleb stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her. She looked up and smiled. You're home early? Yes. She tilted her head, studying his face. You look different? Echoed. I have something important to tell you, Caleb said softly, his voice shaking just enough that Ellie noticed. Her smile faded into something more cautious. She closed her sketchbook and sat up straighter, Max following her lead. What is it? She asked quietly. Caleb hesitated, then sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. When you told me your mother's name, Victoria Mendez, that wasn't the first time I heard it. Ellie blinked. I knew your mom, Ellie, a long time ago, before you were born. She stiffened slightly, eyes wide with uncertainty. We were very close once. She was my first love. Caleb drew in a slow, careful breath. And I believe, his voice broke, but he pushed forward. I believe I'm your father. The room grew very still. Even Max lifted his head, sensing the tension. Ellie stared at him, mouth slightly open, her breath shallow. But you didn't know, she whispered. And she left. No, I didn't know she was pregnant when she left. I would have looked for both of you if I had. Ellie's voice trembled. Why would she not tell you? Caleb closed his eyes, his voice raw. I don't know. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she thought my world, my family, would make things harder for her. But none of that matters now. He gently reached for her hand but didn't take it. He simply left his palm open between them. What matters is you, and that you're here now. And I want to be here for you. Tears welled in Ellie's eyes as she stared at his hand, trembling. You're my dad, she whispered, as though afraid to say it. Caleb's voice cracked. Yes, I believe I am. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then cautiously, Ellie slid her small hand into his. Tears slipped down Caleb's face as he finally closed his hand gently around hers. For the first time they sat there, not just as strangers, not just as two lives who had collided by chance, but as father and daughter. the beginning of everything, they both thought they had lost. Chapter 8. A Father's Last Wish. The days that followed were quiet but different. There was a softness between them now, fragile but unmistakable. An unspoken shift had occurred the night Caleb told Ellie the truth. She hadn't said much after that moment, but she hadn't pulled away either. She allowed him to sit closer. She reached for his hand as they watched movies together. And when the nightmares came, and they still came some nights, she let him sit at the edge of her bed until she drifted back to sleep. Max, as always, remained her constant shadow. The legal process moved quickly, just as Richard had promised. Caleb kept the proceedings as quiet as possible. Discreet home evaluations, private filings, and carefully managed interviews. The judge assigned to their case was compassionate, impressed by Caleb's unwavering commitment to Ellie's care. The fact that he was likely her biological father only strengthened the petition. But for Caleb, the paperwork was secondary. The real work happened every day, inside the apartment, inside their growing bond. One afternoon, Caleb found Ellie at the dining table with colored pencils scattered everywhere, deeply focused on a drawing. He approached quietly, watching as her hand moved carefully across the page. "What are you working on?" he asked softly. Ellie looked up, cheeks flushed. "A surprise." "For me?" She nodded shyly, then bit her lip. "But you can't see it yet." Caleb smiled. "All right, I'll wait." He ruffled her hair gently and was rewarded by a small, almost playful swat of her hand. Later that evening, as they prepared dinner together, a routine they'd built slowly, Ellie glanced up from slicing vegetables. "Do you ever think about my mom?" she asked, her voice small. Caleb paused, the knife in his hand hovering above the cutting board. "Every day." Ellie's eyes searched his face. "Do you miss her?" The question was simple but loaded. "I do," he said quietly. "She was bright, brave, the kind of person who always believed she could change her world." Ellie's voice trembled as she whispered she couldn't. Caleb set the knife down and crouched beside her chair so their eyes met. "She tried, Ellie. She fought hard for you. You're proof of that." Tears welled in her eyes. "I wish I could remember her better." Caleb reached up, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Everything I can do. I'll help you remember. Everything I can." Later that night, when Ellie was asleep, Caleb sat alone on the balcony, the cool night air brushing against his face as the city pulsed far below. He held a framed photograph in his hands. Victoria at 17, smiling brightly, her eyes full of dreams. He whispered into the darkness as if she might hear him somehow. "She's safe now, Victoria, I promise you. I'll give her everything you couldn't." The following weekend, Caleb took Ellie to visit the cemetery for the first time. The small municipal graveyard was simple, unadorned, modest. They stood together before a small plaque marked only with Victoria Mendez 198720018. Ellie clutched Caleb's hand tightly. "This is her?" she whispered. "Yes." Ellie's lips trembled. She knelt, tracing her fingers over the engraved letters. "I thought I would feel mad," she admitted softly, "that she left me. But I just feel sad." Caleb knelt beside her. "She didn't want to leave you, Ellie. She was doing her best to protect you." Ellie stared at the ground. "I used to pretend she was coming back." Caleb's throat closed. "I know." They stayed there for a long time, the wind rustling softly through the trees. Finally, Ellie reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small potted violet. She liked these. Caleb helped her plant it gently into the earth beside the headstone. The tiny purple petals trembled under the wind but stood upright. "Brave," Ellie whispered. Caleb wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. For the first time, neither of them felt like they had to carry the weight alone. As the adoption date drew closer, the apartment transformed even more. Ellie's room was now fully hers. Shelves lined with books, stuffed animals, a proper desk for her drawings, and a small telescope by the window for her nighttime stargazing. Max had a soft bed beside hers, though most nights he still slept on her blankets. Every evening, they added another piece to the life they were building. New recipes, puzzles, movie nights, and long conversations that drifted between silly topics and deeper confessions. One night, as Caleb was tucking Ellie into bed, she suddenly whispered, "Can I ask something?" "Anything." She hesitated, chewing her lip. "After the adoption, will anything change?" "Change," Caleb repeated softly. "Will you still want me here?" The question broke him. He knelt beside her bed and took both of her small hands in his. "Ellie, nothing will ever change how much I want you here. The adoption doesn't create our family, it just makes it official. What we have? That's real, that's forever." Ellie's eyes glistened. "I was so scared that if I messed up you'd change your mind." Caleb swallowed hard. "That will never happen. Nothing you do could make me stop loving you." For a moment she stared at him, searching his face for any hint of doubt. And then, for the first time, she whispered the word she'd never dared say before. "Dad." The word struck him like lightning. His chest ached as tears pricked his eyes. "I love you, Dad." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, fighting his own tears. "I love you too, sweetheart, more than anything." Max raised his head briefly, sensing the emotion in the room, before curling back to sleep at Ellie's feet. As Caleb left her room that night, he paused at the door, quietly watching her sleep. The apartment was no longer a place of silence and emptiness. It was filled with warmth, with breathing, with life. And at the center of it all was a little girl who had survived everything and saved him in the process. Chapter 9. Moments of Joy, Shadows of the Past. The adoption hearing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. Despite the months of preparation and the certainty of the outcome, Caleb still felt the faint, quiet hum of nerves buzzing beneath his ribs as they entered the courthouse. But when he looked down and saw Ellie's small hand wrapped around his, calm and steady, he exhaled. For her, this wasn't just a legal formality. It was a crossing, from survival to belonging. The hearing was simple, intimate. The judge was kind, a middle-aged man who smiled warmly as Ellie took her seat beside Caleb at the front of the courtroom. "Miss Elisa Mendez," he began gently, "do you understand why we're here today?" Ellie nodded softly, sitting tall in her navy blue dress, her hair pulled back into a neat braid Mrs. Martinez had helped her with that morning. "You're going to make us a real family," she answered in her small but clear voice, "even though we already are." The judge smiled. "Exactly. The paperwork simply says what your hearts already know." Caleb couldn't stop himself from squeezing Ellie's hand. When the judge signed the final document and declared the adoption complete, Caleb felt something inside him finally unlock. A door that had been jammed shut for years, now swinging wide open. Ellie was legally his. But more importantly, she was his by choice, by love, by every small act they'd shared since the moment their lives collided on Fifth Avenue. The bailiff offered a small congratulations, and Mrs. Martinez, sitting a few rows back, wiped a quiet tear from her cheek. As they walked out of the courtroom, Max waited patiently outside, tail wagging, as if he too sensed the shift. Ellie knelt to him immediately, whispering, "It's done, Max. We're safe now." Caleb had planned a surprise for her that afternoon. Instead of returning to the penthouse, the driver took a different route, to a quiet residential neighborhood far from the noise of the city center. Ellie looked curiously out the window as trees lined the streets, their early spring blossoms beginning to bloom. When the car stopped, Caleb turned to her. "This," he said, "is home." The small house wasn't extravagant, not by billionaire standards, but it was perfect. A cozy two-story structure with a wraparound porch, wide windows, and a fenced backyard full of sunshine. A home built for family, not for display. Ellie blinked, stunned. Hours. She climbed out of the car, Max right behind her, and wandered through the gate into the backyard. There was space for her plants. A tree perfect for climbing, soft grass beneath her bare feet. "This is real," she whispered, almost afraid to believe it. Caleb smiled, his throat tightening. "Very real." She threw her arms around him suddenly, nearly knocking him off balance. "Thank you, Dad." He held her tightly, pressing his cheek against her hair. "You never have to thank me, sweetheart. This is where you belong." They spent the rest of the day exploring every corner of the house. Ellie chose the bedroom at the back of the house, where sunlight poured through the wide windows. Caleb had already arranged for her books, drawings, and telescope to be moved in. The telescope now stood perfectly by the window, waiting for their next round of stargazing. Max immediately claimed a spot near her bed, as if he too recognized this as their permanent refuge. In the kitchen, Caleb had installed a small table, large enough for their meals together but intimate enough for conversation. "No more cold, giant dining rooms?" Ellie teased with a grin. "No more," Caleb promised. They both laughed, a sound that felt lighter now, freer. In the weeks that followed, life found its rhythm. Caleb continued managing his empire, but his priorities had shifted. Business no longer consumed him the way it once did. His mornings began with breakfast together, and his evenings always ended with Ellie, helping with homework, cooking dinner side by side, or simply sitting under the stars. For the first time since his parents had died, Caleb felt like his life was no longer driven by survival or obligation. He was living, truly living. Ellie thrived at her new school. The teachers noticed her sharp mind quickly, particularly her love for science. Her teacher, Mrs. Thompson, pulled Caleb aside one afternoon during a parent-teacher conference. "He's extraordinary," Mrs. Thompson said. "Curious, methodical, and kind to the other students. She has a natural mind for problem-solving." Caleb smiled proudly. "She gets that from her mother." He didn't explain further. Some things didn't need to be said. Yet even as their new life bloomed, shadows remained. Ellie carried her past quietly, not as a burden she spoke of, but as an invisible backpack she wore each day. Sometimes it showed itself unexpectedly. One night, Caleb heard muffled sobs from her room. He found her sitting up in bed, Max resting his head on her lap. Nightmares still came. She looked up at him, tears streaking her face. "I dreamed I was back on the street, and you couldn't find me." Caleb crossed the room and sat beside her, gently pulling her into his arms. "I'll always find you, Ellie, no matter what. You'll never be alone again." Her small body trembled against his chest as he rocked her gently, whispering those promises over and over until she finally drifted back to sleep. Spring turned to summer, and slowly, Ellie began asking small questions about Victoria. "Was she scared when she left you?" Ellie asked one afternoon as they sat in the backyard planting flowers. Caleb took a moment before answering. "I think she was scared of many things. Of disappointing people, of not being enough, of failing you before you were even born." Ellie's voice was small. "She didn't fail me." "No," Caleb whispered. "She didn't. She gave me you." They planted violets together. Victoria's favorite, brave, even in the cold. Caleb honored Victoria's memory in his own quiet way too. He established a charitable foundation in her name, the Mendez Fund, dedicated to helping homeless children and young mothers in crisis. A way to rewrite what had been lost. A way to give others what Victoria never received. When he told Ellie about it, her eyes glistened. She would have liked that. Caleb smiled. "I hope so." But even as the wounds began healing, small echoes of pain still surfaced unexpectedly. One afternoon, Ellie returned from school quieter than usual. As they prepared dinner together, Caleb noticed her long silences. "Rough day?" he asked gently. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some kids said I didn't belong. That I only got into school because you're rich." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone calm. "That isn't true." "I know," Ellie said quickly. "But it still hurt." He wiped his hands and knelt beside her. "You belong everywhere you choose to stand, Ellie. Not because of me, because of you. You're brilliant. You've earned every bit of this life." Tears filled her eyes. I don't want to lose it." "You won't," Caleb whispered, pulling her into a hug. "No one can take this away from you. Ever." And she believed him, because this time the promises stayed. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Ellie rested her head against Caleb's shoulder. "You know what I want to be when I grow up?" she asked softly. "What's that, sweetheart?" "A doctor, like Mom wanted to be." Caleb swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "You'd be an amazing doctor." Ellie smiled, her eyes full of hope. "For her, and for me." He wrapped his arm tighter around her. "For both of you." Chapter 10. Legacy of Love. The house was quiet that morning, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the heavy, hollow silence Caleb had once known, but a peaceful quiet, filled with soft echoes of laughter from the night before, the warmth of new roots growing stronger each day. He stood in the kitchen, stirring Ellie's favorite oatmeal with cinnamon and honey, listening for the sound of her bare feet padding down the hallway. When she finally appeared, her hair still a wild tangle from sleep, she smiled and rubbed her eyes. "Morning, Dad." "Good morning, sweetheart." Max followed her loyally, already sitting by his usual spot at the kitchen table, waiting for his share of breakfast. Caleb smiled. This had become their rhythm, and every morning he woke up thankful that it existed. Later that day, they stood together in the backyard, surveying the newest addition Ellie had insisted on, a small greenhouse tucked into the corner of the yard. Inside, violets bloomed alongside ferns, basil, and tomatoes. It had become Ellie's sanctuary. "This one's doing really well," Ellie said, gently misting one of the flowering vines. Caleb watched her carefully tend to each plant, her hands steady, her face relaxed. She carried the same quiet strength Victoria once had, though shaped by different battles. "You've built a whole world here," Caleb said softly. Ellie smiled. "It feels like ours." "It is ours." The warm summer breeze danced around them as Max wandered lazily through the grass, content as ever. In the following weeks, preparations began for Ellie's first day at her new school. This one wasn't just private, it was specialized, a STEM-focused academy that had eagerly offered Ellie a full scholarship after her outstanding test scores. Caleb watched as she buzzed with excitement, picking out school supplies, carefully labeling notebooks, and organizing her pencils with meticulous precision. "I'm kind of nervous," she admitted one evening while packing her back. "That's perfectly normal," Caleb assured her. "What if I mess up?" Caleb knelt in front of her, cupping her face gently. "But if I do?" "Then you try again. Mistakes don't scare me, and they shouldn't scare you." Ellie smiled softly. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." She hugged him then, tighter than usual. "I'm glad I found you," she whispered. Caleb closed his eyes, holding her close. "I didn't find you, Ellie. You found me." As school began, Ellie thrived. Her teachers quickly saw what Caleb had known all along. Not just intelligence, but resilience. She devoured her science courses, asked brilliant questions, stayed after class to work on extra projects. She'd found her place. One evening, as Caleb returned from a late board meeting, he found her still at the dining table, poring over a complex biology textbook. He smiled and sat across from her. "Late night?" She nodded, grinning. "It's so cool, Dad. Did you know some sea slugs steal chloroplasts from algae and photosynthesize like plants? They're like little hybrid creatures." Caleb laughed. "And you're my little hybrid scientist." She giggled. "Maybe one day I can work in a lab." "You'll change the world one day, Ellie, just like your mother wanted to." Her eyes softened at the mention of Victoria, but she no longer flinched at her name. Instead, she smiled gently. "I hope she's proud." "She is," Caleb said firmly. "She always was." Caleb had kept one last surprise for her. It was something he had been quietly planning with Richard for months, a project long overdue. Something not for his business empire, but for Ellie's legacy. It was intimidating, it was complex. One Sunday afternoon, as they walked through a nearby city block, Ellie noticed the newly constructed building with wide glass windows, soft white stone, and blooming flower beds out front. Above the entrance, elegant silver letters read, "The Mendez Center, Shelter and Hope for Families." Ellie froze. She whispered. Caleb gently took her hand. "It's in your mother's name." The center was designed to house homeless mothers and children, offering medical care, education programs, and transitional housing. Everything Victoria never had. Tears filled Ellie's eyes. "You built this?" "We built this," Caleb corrected softly. "In her honor." "And in yours." Ellie stared at the building for a long time, her breath catching as the meaning of it sank in. This would have saved her. Caleb swallowed hard. "I know, and maybe now it will save others." Ellie turned to him, her voice steady despite her tears. "I want to help here too, when I'm older." "You will," Caleb promised. She wiped her cheeks and smiled. Then it'll be our work. He kissed her forehead softly. Our work. Seasons passed. Their home grew fuller with memories. Movie nights, Max's playful barking, Ellie's first science fair, her first A-plus report cards proudly pinned to the refrigerator door. And yet, despite the happiness they now lived in, Caleb never forgot where they had started. He remembered every cold night, every empty street, every fear Ellie once carried. He had built a billion-dollar empire once, but none of it had ever brought him peace. It was these small, quiet, ordinary moments that healed him. One evening, as the sky glowed pink above the city skyline, Ellie sat with Caleb on the backyard swing. They watched Max chase butterflies under the setting sun. Yes, sweetheart. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Do you ever wonder why it happened the way it did? Why we found each other? Caleb stared at the horizon for a moment, breathing in the soft breeze. I used to think everything had to make sense, but not anymore. Because even broken roads can lead to beautiful places. Ellie smiled softly, her fingers tracing little circles on his arm. Like here? He kissed the top of her head, exactly like here. The wind carried the faint scent of violets from the garden, brave and blooming. As the stars slowly appeared above them, Ellie whispered the words Caleb would carry in his heart for the rest of his life. I'm not scared anymore. And neither was he. Not anymore. They say some stories aren't written in ink, but in second chances. In glances exchanged across broken places. In hands that find each other when neither expected to be saved. Caleb often thought back to that night on Fifth Avenue, the moment everything shifted. The barefoot girl, a dog whose ribs showed through his fur, a simple voice whispering, "They don't hurt anymore," and how those words had shattered everything inside him that he thought was unbreakable. He'd built walls his whole life, walls of money, power, control, but none of it had prepared him for the quiet courage of a little girl who had nothing but a dog and an unyielding will to survive. He hadn't rescued her that night. The truth was, she rescued him. Ellie taught him what his boardrooms, his penthouse, and his billion-dollar deals never could. That love wasn't loud. It wasn't contracts or grand gestures. It was small. It was steady. It was choosing someone. Every day, again and again. He was waiting through the long silences. He was sitting beside her on quiet nights, when the past whispered cruel things. It was planting violets in the backyard. Because even fragile things could bloom again. And slowly, together, they rewrote both of their stories. Not as lost people, not as broken people, but as family. Caleb watched now as Ellie sat beneath the oak tree in their backyard, sketching under the summer sun. Max dozed beside her, his head resting lazily on her foot. She was taller these days, her once thin frame filling out, her hair longer, her smile more frequent. But she still had her mother's eyes. And sometimes, when she laughed, he swore he heard Victoria's voice echoing gently inside it. Ellie looked up, catching his gaze. What? She teased with a smile. Nothing, he said softly, his voice full. I'm just proud. She grinned and returned to her sketching, humming softly, one of the old lullabies her mother used to sing, the one about the little bird. Victoria was gone, but not lost, because in Ellie she lived on. In every drawing, in every question about the stars, in every act of quiet bravery, in the Mendez Center, where women and children walked through the doors she never had, doors Caleb had opened in her name. In their little home, where pancakes were flipped on quiet Sunday mornings, where textbooks and plants filled the rooms, where love had finally taken root. And as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Caleb whispered a promise into the warm evening breeze. The same promise he'd made to Victoria years ago. I found her, and I'll protect her, always. Life isn't always fair, but sometimes life gives you back exactly what you lost, not in the same shape, not in the same way, but better, stronger, real. Family is not always who you start with. Sometimes it's who you fight to stay with. And when you finally find them, you hold on forever.